But first, the judge overseeing Donald Trump's New York City criminal trial agreed Friday to delay his sentencing until after Election Day. The former president was previously scheduled to be sentenced on September 18th after being found guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records back in May. Trump requested to delay his sentencing, and Judge Juan Merchan agreed, pushing it back to Tuesday, November 26th, in part to avoid appearing as if the court, quote, seeks to affect the approaching presidential election. CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson joins me now. So, Jessica, the sentencing's now scheduled for after the election. So the big question, do you expect that the outcome of the election might have an impact on the sentencing?
Well, it might, because the outcome of the election obviously could determine whether or not former President Trump becomes President-elect Trump. And even though this is a state case and presidents only have power to pardon when it comes to federal cases, if in fact former President Trump wins the election, I think he would make an argument that it would violate the separation of powers to imprison the future chief executive, or depending on when the sentence would be, the current sitting president. All of which is to say, if he wins, he'll make an argument that says, state court judge, you can't put me, the head of the executive branch, in jail. So yes, the outcome of the election could make a difference.
So what happens, though, Jessica, if the election is contested beyond November 26th? There's some precedent for that, and I'm wondering if Judge Merchan had anything to say about that possibility.
So I think that all of this obviously is if. Judge Merchan is very much aware of the fact that we might not know the outcome of the election. One thing to note is that I think this doesn't just depend on what happens in the election, and we should be careful that there's a legal difference between a president-elect and a sitting president. But what Judge Merchan is going to do before the sentencing is rule on whether or not the Supreme Court's decision in the immunity case that says presidents enjoy and former presidents enjoy broad immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts, if that affects this case. So we have all of these factors: election, contested election, and immunity decision, all of which could change when the sentencing occurs and what the sentence is.
And Jessica, on that front, we know that Trump's legal team has argued that that Supreme Court ruling on immunity should cover it. We know also that the prosecutors say these were acts that took place while he was running for president and preceded him actually being president. They weren't part of him being president or presidential acts. So how might that all play into a question of presidential immunity?
Well, you laid that out perfectly. That is the question, right? The question is whether or not prosecutors will be able to convince Judge Merchan that the allegations, or the vast, vast majority of allegations, and what led to the conviction, the facts that led to the conviction here, because let's remember there was a conviction, whether or not that hinged on or dealt with official acts by a president or unofficial acts by a candidate. And just very briefly, to refresh everybody's recollection, the prosecution's theory of the case has been this was about election interference. It was about candidate Trump trying to pay off somebody who was going to share a story that would make him look bad, Stormy Daniels, indirectly paying him off, and that none of this has anything to do with official acts. Even if he signed some checks while in office, it's the same as making a dinner reservation while in office. It's not an official act. So that's what Judge Merchan is going to look at. And then, of course, there could be an appeal of his decision.